Good morning, and thanks for joining the webinar, Bottleneck, Accelerating Approvals Without Losing Control. We're excited to have everyone here join us today, and there's just a few housekeeping rules and notes that we want to run through before we start the webinar. Just so you know, this session is actually being recorded, so we'll share at the end of this session the recording, so then you can review this or pass this on to colleagues. Also, if you'd like to ask a question at any point, please use the Q&A box, and we'll save this for the end of the session to then answer as many questions as we can. So that will be time dependent, just be aware of that. We'll also be running a few polls throughout the session, so this will be quite an interactive session. So if you guys can both just talk about, your business. Stephen, you can go first if that's all right.
Yeah. Jasbe Petroleum, we own and run 56 service stations in Victoria and New South Wales. We employ more than 500 employees. Each of our store is managed by a store manager, and every store manager will report to an area manager, who in turn reports to the operation manager in head office. Each of the store managers process between 4 to 6 invoices per day. That's around 35 invoices a week. This adds up to 1,800 invoices per store per year. In short, we process more than 100,000 invoices in a year.
Thanks, Stephen, for that. Joyce, just talk about Beef Australia a little bit, just so we can understand what Beef Australia does, what market you guys are in, and just about the volumes and also the size of the organisation.
I work for Beef Australia every 3 years in Rockhampton. Very opposite to Stephen, we're one office and we only have one person in finance. But during an event year, we do 180 supply payments a month.
Thanks, guys. Thanks both for being part of this webinar today. So let's talk about the webinar today. The first topic of conversation is around why approval efficiency matters. It is a nice approval workflows aren't just a nice to have, they're actually a strategic imperative, and that's what we're focusing on today. So according to recent studies conducted by Xero, almost 50% of small business invoices were paid late, costing SMEs around $1.1 billion per year, which is quite a lot. Other stats also are workflow automation reduces data entry errors by up to 80%, and 72% of finance departments report improved accuracy and compliance by implementing workflow automation tools. Now, when we think of efficiencies, the word volume, and we've talked about the volume as well, just from Joyce and Stephen. I'd like everyone to get involved, and we've got our first poll question. And one of the questions that we're asking today is the time spent on approvals. How long does it take for an invoice or expense in your organisation to be approved? And if you guys can respond to that one, as well as the second one, how much time does your finance team spend each week chasing approvals for sign-off? I'll just give you guys a couple seconds and then we'll share results after this. Okay, so it looks like, just looking at the stats, 3 to 5 days is the typical time frame for an invoice or expense to be approved. Looks like quite a bit of a split, but looks like 3 to 5 days is typical, which is what I'd expect. And then when it comes to the actual finance team chasing approvals, we've got here less than 30 minutes as the number one choice. Thanks everyone for that. So next part of our webinar today is around approval challenges that mid-market finance go through and the key trends and impact. So according to research, 65% of companies still rely on manual invoices, which is actually quite crazy in this day and age when you think about it. So this leads to approval cycles averaging 10 to 15 days. And compounded with volume, this can be even longer, and you can put an impact on the supply chain, but also the suppliers and the employees. So just asking the question to you, Stephen, firstly, with the volume that Jasbe experiences and are operating with, what are some of the approval challenges that you've in your role and the business as a whole face on a day-to-day?
Firstly, the service station retail industry is a 24/7 fast-paced business. All the payments have to be approved on a very timely basis. Our site manager who runs the store and who process the invoices for approval and payment, their work hours typically is between 5 o'clock in the morning to 2 o'clock in the afternoon. Whereas for head office to approve payment, we usually do it after 2 o'clock. So this would present a bit of a timing issue if the approval process is not done sort of via online, because you can't get hold of the managers to ask questions because they already left the workplace. So this is especially so when some payments are urgent in nature. For example, a repair and maintenance invoice, because some tradies, they will not start work unless they get paid upfront. So if the invoice is not approved, obviously it can't be paid. So with the ProSpend, using ProSpend, we can actually get all the information, the history of the invoice, who processed this invoice, who approved the invoice. So we have a trail of all these invoices that has been processed for payment. And yeah, this is very critical, because even with trades that provide a credit term, if you consistently breach the payment terms, then the credit terms will be withdrawn. So if the repair is not done, then you probably have to, on the worst case scenario, you probably need to close the shop. You can't operate.
Yeah, thanks,
Yep.
Stephen, for that. I might move on to Joyce. Yeah, that would be a big problem because you're a very fast-moving business. So, Joyce, if you can just talk about Beef Australia and what the current approval challenges that you guys face on a day-to-day before implementing a solution.
The beef's approval workflow is a little bit unusual. Our treasurer is one of the approvers. So our workflow is the manager, CEO, then treasurer. So for 2 of the 3 years of the beef cycle, none of the approvers are in the same location. So this could lead to potential delays in payments, invoices being overlooked, data not being captured. And without automation, there's also the potential for the approvals to be granted out of sequence.
Wonderful. Yeah, that would be definitely a big problem in business. So just moving on to the next part of our webinar. So we've talked about the volume and the growing complexity on invoice approvals. So let's just tackle the elephant in the room. So why do manual approval processes fail? So Joyce, just back to you. Why do you think manual approval processes fail in the first place?
So without automation, the options available are for the approvers to either be physically present or to approve by email, which requires uploading all the supporting documentation and keeping a record of the email chain and keeping the email chain in the approval order. So sometimes you have to send it to person 1, they have to sign it, before you can then send it to person 2, because you need person 1 and person 2 on the same document. When it comes to the audit, paper copies and email chains are disorganized. Through automation, approvals are handled in the correct sequence, and all the necessary documentation can be seamlessly uploaded into the system. And that documentation is the invoice, the purchase order, the tender, contract, the delegation. The supporting documentation can all be viewed from a single screen, which I really like. And this approval system speeds up and streamlines the audit. So previously, the auditor would pick out an invoice, and they would ask for this document, that document. Behind every accountant was rows and rows of compactors. You're up and down off the seat finding everything for the auditor. Now all I do is I can give the auditor access to ProSpend, or at the click of a button, I can just produce everything that's requested.
Yeah, as a former accountant, I can totally understand, and that actually brings back past traumas. Just you talking about having all those folders in a room and filing everything and trying to find documents for auditors. So having a system that's online and being able to get visibility around that spend is very important. So I appreciate that input. And Stephen, for yourself at Jasbe, why would manual processes not work at Jasbe in the past?
In the past, when the approval trail can only be found via the emails. Now, sometimes the approval in head or the payment approval person in head office is left out of the email chain because he is not part of the operation team. Okay, but when the invoice is presented for payment, then you start asking questions like I mentioned before. The manager goes home at 2 o'clock, and you ended up calling someone after working hours, or when you speak to the operations manager and where's who approved this and all that. Sometimes he is not in the email trail as well, so you have a problem of people who are supposed to be in the email chain. They are not in the email chain. People who are not supposed to be in the email chain, they are being copied in as well. And yes, so it creates a lot of friction between the finance team and the operations team, because as far as the operation team is concerned, we need this invoice to be paid. Otherwise, the supplier will stop supply, our shelves will be empty, or the tradesmen will not commence work. Things are not being repaired or maintained on a timely basis, and all sorts of argument or unhappiness will arise between the two teams. So yeah, manual process used to have that effect on us.
Yeah, wonderful. Thanks, Stephen, for that. I'd imagine
Yes.
because of the fast-moving pace that your industry is in, you have some suppliers, when they have deliveries sent to your stores, they'd want payment immediately. So timely manner of approvals is very important.
Yes.
Okay, moving on to the next part of our webinar. We're running a couple more polls. I assure you that we've got a few more after this. So the poll that we've got up on screen is, as your organisation has grown, how have your approval processes changed? And the next one is, what is the biggest consequence you've experienced from delayed approvals? So just have a look at some of the responses and choose the most appropriate, and we'll give you a couple of seconds to respond and share those results. All right, another 5 seconds, guys. All right, no more responses. Great. Okay, look, just looking at the responses that we have, it looks like, yep, some automation added, but gaps remain. So there's been some changes, some technology put in place, but it looks like that's the most responded to that question. And then what's the biggest consequence you've experienced from delayed approvals? Yep, looks like it's the same response. So missed early payment discounts, so it's the same level pegging on that one. Thanks for that, guys. So the next slide is around impact on slow and manual approvals and the multi-layers around that. So just talking through this part of the webinar, there are direct dollar impacts around that. So some of the reasons why a slower manual approval and what occurs with that whole process, if they are manual, is there obviously be late payments and missed discounts, as well as vendor relationships get strained, as Stephen has mentioned in his previous experience. So if we're asking that question to Stephen again, what would be some of the impacts? You did mention the tension that there are around the vendors and the supplier, the employee tension as well. Could you add a little bit more to that around some of the managers and some of the issues you've experienced with approvals by having those late payments and those missed discounts?
Okay, as I said, our payments are being processed by 56 different managers. So not everyone is actually up to speed in terms of their paperwork. So in terms of a vendor relationship, if the payment is consistently late, then the finance team in the vendors team will obviously start to put barriers in terms of our trades. Like I said, withhold payment, withhold services, withhold deliveries, withhold services, and then our operations manager will have to go in to damage control mode. And yeah, it's a very irritating process. It's not often being fixed. Sometimes they put you back on probation for 6 months before you get back your previous terms, and these are very destructive for the operations. Now, for the managers as well, using the manual processing process, we have 56 managers. They come from different background, and in terms of communication, some of them are just not that good. So when you question the manager and ask them, who approved this invoice, a simple question like that will put them very much on a defense. You know, they'll feel that you do not trust them. You are asking them questions. You are investigating them and things like that. So that is a problem, you see. So with a automated system, that's okay. If an invoice, they can't process it because it has not been approved properly, then you're not dealing with a person, you're just dealing with the system. So that avoids you can't be personal with ProSpend, you know what I mean? Whereas with me or any of the finance team, sometimes the managers can get personal with them. Dante, I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's really good. Yeah, and I totally understand where you're coming from, and lots of people probably on this webinar understand that whole tension that becomes apparent between the finance team and the people that are approving invoices, the managers. And it shouldn't be around the people. It should be around, obviously, you know, the right people approving and the strain in the manual processing with those delays shouldn't be part of that. Just weighing in on that, Joyce, if you could just give some input around your experience and just with the manual processes and some of the impacts that Beef Australia has faced around having manual approvals.
Thank you, Dante. If beef were to rely on manual approvals, we would need more resources in finance. We'd need someone to be initiating, storing and recording all the documentation and the approval chain. And the manual process inevitably leads to delays in supply payments, which can incur credit charges, and the impact of late payments on the cash flow and interest loss. Yeah, it just wouldn't be feasible for Beef Australia to use a manual process, especially during the lead up to and the actual event. It just, yeah, wouldn't be feasible. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks, Joyce. Yeah, and I imagine you've got that big event that happens every couple of years. It'd be quite frantic. So having a proper process would make it much more easier, especially in that busy period as well. Because when you're busy, you want to have good systems in place around that. So great. We'll move on to the next part. So we're talking about best practices for approval workflows. So we've talked about the approval challenges that are caused by manual processes and the impacts for SMEs, but just not financially, but also operational and culturally. So we're going to ask the question now, what does a good approval workflow look like? And also we're going to ask questions around what are some of the best practices? So some examples of that is introducing multi-level approval policies. So having 2 approvers for large expenses. So not every invoice that comes through requires an approver to approve. You could have, obviously those operational costs that come through where you don't need to have someone review that because they come through recurring each month. Doesn't need those approvers. And then the other one is around enforcing spending thresholds. So putting delegated authority limits around those approvers in that matrix to then build out an approval workflow. So for those minor purchases, like I mentioned, you can obviously have self-approvals. So the CFO doesn't need to sign off on them. Maintaining segregation of duties. So in accounting terms, that's very important. That's one of the doctrines. You need to have segregation of duties. So you need to make sure you separate that. So if you're a larger organization, that's very important. Even for a smaller organization, having one person do all the work is an issue. So having that segregation, so one person that receives the invoice, sends off to the approval, and then finance to finalize and send through and make payment. And then the last thing is, there's 2 more items. The last part of the best practice of an approval workflow is having reminders. So having those system-generated alerts to go through to the people that haven't approved invoices in a timely manner, to then, obviously people are busy with their day-to-day stuff, to have those reminders periodically come through and have clear expectations on timelines of those approvals. So approvals don't just stay there in the system. And finally, having a system in place that will then also detect fraud. So that's quite common these days where invoices come through, and I'm sure everyone can weigh in on this, where they've received an invoice and it's questionable. You can kind of tell, but they're getting smarter. But having software to then scan the banking information and then cross-referencing to the accounting master record of that supplier to make sure that banking information matches up and there's no fraud occurring. So just talking about this part of the webinar around the best practices, Stephen, what are some of the workflows that Jasbe has implemented, and what do they look like?
Well, we use ProSpend actually quite a lot in terms of the approval process. First of all, like I said, to process and pay 100,000 invoices a year, that's a big task, Dante. and you can't really go and check and make sure that every single invoices is correct. So the easiest thing is that only approved suppliers can be processed. And this is something that you can only achieve by having a workflow system. You know, if the supplier is not being onboarded onto the system, you can't even select it from a list of suppliers to pay. Okay, so that is the very important thing for us. Okay, and also setting the approval limits for every store managers, the approval limit for the area managers, and also approval limit in head office level. So again, that is something that can be enforced effectively only through an automated approval system. Manual, some people will approve things beyond their limit, even though they're being told specifically you're not authorized to approve this payment. So the other thing is that we have certain suppliers which are not the day-to-day trading suppliers. So that sort of suppliers invoices will have to be approved by at least the area managers, if not the operation manager or head office. And for major capital asset approval, that can only be done at head office level. Again, for a structured organization like ours, to structure the approval process is not difficult. You know, a manager, what can he approve? An area manager, what can he approve? That is not difficult at all, but the challenge is to enforce it. And the best way to enforce it is to build it in a platform like ProSpend. And if you are not authorized to process this payment, to approve this payment, you just can't go beyond the next screen. The button is gray. You can't click on it. No matter how many times, it can't be approved. Okay, Dante.
Yeah,
so,
that's awesome.
Yeah. So that's how we use ProSpend. Okay.
Yeah, thanks for that value insight, Stephen. I really appreciate that. And I'd imagine, having 10,000 invoices, I can't even think of how many staff you'd need to have in the finance team to process invoices. So that's a huge number, the sheer volume. It's not really physically possible. So just on, Joyce, just around that question around automation and how that helps with workflows. From your experience, what's the impact that's occurred by putting in a system? And obviously, you guys use ProSpend, but any system in place, what would be the impact that you would see as well by having an automation system?
Thank you, Dante. One of the main features in ProSpend that enhances the workflow for us is the budget function. The managers can all raise their purchase orders and initiate supply payments within their spending threshold and an approved budget. The potential to overspend is identified at the purchase order and not at the actual payment end, which is important to us. Beef can maintain the same, if not superior, financial controls, with the delegates being geographically remote from each other. So I think for us, the budget module is very important. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Sorry to cut you off, Joyce, but that's great. The budget module is amazing to be paired with purchase orders. So exactly what you're saying, you're getting that visibility around what your budget is for your department or your event, to be able to then, obviously see if you've got available budget, but also overruns around that as well. So that's very important to have, have those controls. So, that really echoes what ProSpend's about, proactive spending. So, purchase orders, budgets to control costs before they actually hit the P&L or are out to actual payment, because those conversations are very difficult later on. So just a bit of a follow-up question to yourself, Stephen, and I appreciate those responses, Joyce, as well. Just on what we've talked about just now on this slide, did you actually see much of a culture change when you implemented an approval system, that whole change management piece? What was the direct impact when that occurred?
I think the most obvious thing, like I said, is that this took away, this gave a lot of clarity in terms of what you can do within the organization, and it also take away unwanted arguments, because the finance team don't make the rules, they just implement them. They're not there to arbitrarily saying that no, you can approve this, no, yes, you can approve this, no, you can't approve that. It's not for them to decide. So they should not be copying all the aggressiveness or aggression or abuses from co-workers, from fellow managers, and some of these the operations manager, they are, in terms of hierarchy, they are a bit higher than some of the finance team member. So like I said, that the ProSpend will clearly define what you can or cannot do. Okay, so the finance team don't make the decisions, don't make the rules, don't make the policies. It has been the policies, the rules has been defined by the management team, and using a system like ProSpend eliminates any form of arguments altogether.
Yeah, awesome. Thanks, Stephen, for that. And just for yourself, Joyce, was there any sort of shift in people's thoughts or their culture change in the business after implementing a system in the business? Was it something that was a positive impact or a negative impact? How was that received by the team?
Thank you, Dante. From a finance point of view, sort of gets finance off the hook a lot, because with the budget being in ProSpend and the budget's approved by the board, if the manager has any issues because they don't have enough in their bucket of money, they don't take it up with finance because it's approved by the board. So it kind of gets us off the hook having a lot of those conversations, like what Stephen just mentioned. The managers were really on board with ProSpend. They were just given their own bucket of money, no micromanaging, off they went. They don't answer to me, they answer to the board.
Yeah, brilliant. Yeah, thank you so much. Really appreciate that. So that's really a good segue to our next poll question. So we've got two more here. So we're talking about finance team strain and visibility and control. So how much do approval bottlenecks impact your finance team's ability to focus on strategic work? So, obviously you've got your day-to-day stuff, and then, when you're talking about someone that's, managing lots of work as well, not just the financial transactions, as well as, maybe budgeting and forecasting, those types of things. So it's just thinking about those types of scenarios. And then the last poll here is, how confident are you in knowing the real-time status of all pending approvals? So I'll give a few seconds to respond to these poll questions and share results. I did notice the numbers were a little bit down with the responses, guys, so make sure you contribute. All right, a couple more seconds, guys. Awesome. Okay, so we'll just share results. Brilliant. Okay, so the first question, how much do approval bottlenecks impact your finance team on strategic work? Occasionally. Okay, so 58% result on that one. So I'd imagine it'd be probably around month end or those sort of busier periods as well. And then how confident are you in knowing the real-time status of all the pending approvals? So it seems like it's quite even, Stephen, but we have somewhat confident. So yeah, thanks for that. All right, so let's talk about our capabilities. So talking about ProSpend, we've had great advocates today, Stephen and Joyce. Obviously, they've been a great contribution to this webinar. We haven't paid them any money, just so you know. They've spoken on their own will as well. But we're going to talk about ProSpend and what our capabilities are, just at a high level, so you can understand what we provide. So what we offer is an efficient approval system, and there's customizable approvals built into the platform. So that will allow finance teams to configure their multi-level approvals with ease. So routing any expense, for anything over $5,000 to the CFO, anything under $5,000 goes to the department manager, just to ensure the right people approve the right transactions. And that can be configured at different layers and different departments, so quite configurable. And part of the whole implementation of a system, you can tweak them as you go as well, so it's not set in stone. And then also real-time tracking and alerts. So once an invoice is being sent off for approval, they're all visible in dashboards. So one of the biggest problems and hurdles, and just what Stephen and Joyce has mentioned in their previous way of working with manual processes, is having visibility and keeping a track of those invoices that have been sent off for approval via email. ProSpend provides one dashboard to see all the invoices in various statuses. Then also approvers get those instant notifications to then go approve those invoices, and then reminders. So that way, finance isn't chasing things up manually themselves and badgering people. The system handles that. So the last part is policy enforcement and audit trails. So ProSpend system will not allow out of policy actions. So if a manager tries to approve a purchase above their limit, it will require an additional approver. So no more workarounds via email. And every approval action is logged with a timestamp and a user. So that way you have complete transparency on audit logs, depending on your industry, but also good practice. That might be a required mandatory thing to have for auditors, to have a complete trail. So ProSpend has that built in. So CFOs can see exactly who's verified the invoice and approved it, and that will give peace of mind for them. ProSpend also, as I mentioned earlier in the webinar, we have a fraud function as well. So scanning invoice data for the banking information across and matching it to the supplier master record in the accounting system, and then also identifying duplicate invoices and any abnormal invoices above the averages of what a normal invoice would be in terms of values for that supplier. So moving on to the next part is our 4-step approval optimization roadmap. So this is obviously from us working with our clients, the likes of Stephen and Joyce, as well as developing the product for the market. Now we've identified the 4 steps that is the best roadmap to optimize approvals. So for companies going out there looking, you might be in the room here listening into this webinar and thinking, how do I start? How do I optimize my approvals? And what does that roadmap look like? So the first step in the approval optimization process is assess the current state. So looking at gaps and begin with an honest audit of the approval process and what you currently do. Identify where approvals get stuck or bypassed. Is it due to unclear spending limits? Are there too many approvers for small purchases? Map out the pain points first. And then the next step is setting policies. So define clear policies and limits, establish or update approval policies, determine monetary thresholds for each approval level. So team managers up to $1,000, department managers up to $5,000 to approve an invoice, and CFOs above $5,000. So then clarify who needs to approve what. And as Joyce has mentioned, the management team in Beef Australia set that up and defined that. So the accountability and basically the finger pointing isn't at Joyce, it's at management team, because they've set those clear guidelines and structure in place for approvals. And then more importantly, talking about segregation of duties, so having that clearly defined as well. So that way, if someone's off or that potential risk of fraud, you don't have one person doing all the work when it comes to processing the transaction, approving, and also payment of invoices. Just so you know, after this webinar, we will share this approval optimization roadmap. So you'll be able to see this in a checklist as well. So the last part is now talking about the leveraging of automation tools. So one thing that from this optimization roadmap, obviously you want to look for some tools in the market that will work well for the business, obviously based on your budget and your industry. So looking at technology like us, that will complement your tech stack or your accounting system. So ProSpend works with 50 different accounting systems. So there's a good chance we will work with that, but it's also good to look at other systems as well to compare as well, just for due diligence. So if you are, on a tight budget, employing just the approval module can deliver return on investment by preventing late payments. And then just on this roadmap, the last fourth step is also talking about the train and refine. So training and continuous refining. As I mentioned earlier, ProSpend is adaptable to your workflows and you'll have access to make changes as needed. So we'll provide the training, we'll roll out that process and work with you around that change management piece, but also they will then understand what their responsibilities are, what the delegated authority is, and that they're signing off on invoices. So we can have metrics that can also talk about approval times, so reports on that, and bottleneck incidents, those types of things, to be able to report on that, to then check in to make sure that you are hitting those KPIs, and then listening to your team as well around what the feedback is of how the process is working, and adjusting the workflows and rules and approval limits based on that feedback. So the goal is a living process that adapts as needed and as the business grows. So these features are fully integrated, just not bolted on. So they're proactive, not reactive. Any sort of thoughts from yourself, both Joyce and Stephen? Joyce, maybe you can go first around, any company looking at starting their journey with an automated approval system. If you could just weigh in on that if you can, thanks.
Thank you, Dante. So you really need to understand your business finance, your delegations, and your process, and the process you desire, because that can be two different things. As you say, determine the gaps, find out what isn't functioning and where the bottlenecks are. I involved the management team in the initial early conversations when I was going to go down the path of automation. It was important because we were also going to change the way the budget was done. They were all now going to hold their own budget. And so for some of the managers, using this technology was going to be different to what they were used to. I actually got them to the point where they were excited, so that's pretty good in change. When you have all the information, I found the automation process was very seamless and productive. I think it was only weeks. I think it only took weeks to make the change, so I was very happy.
Yeah, that's awesome. It's good to hear that there's been positive impact and people are excited about software or doing admin. Stephen, moving on to yourself, any sort of advice you can give to anyone potentially looking to market or looking at starting their journey with an AEP invoice approval system?
Okay, but it all depends what's your objective or what you try to achieve here. Like for me, because me and the directors in the company, when a payment is put in front of you for approval in the computer, you don't have a lot of information. So a lot of times you look at the suppliers and that's about it. So it's about having the comfort, knowing that what you are authorizing, the payments that you are authorized, they are the correct payment and they are the correct amount and approved by the correct person. So like for a business like ours, with more than 100,000 invoices, without a system in place, that can't be achieved. So the good thing about using a system like ProSpend is that when you are in doubt with a payment, before you press the approve button, you log into ProSpend, you click on that supplier, you look at the invoices that has been presented for payment, you have the whole history trail there. Okay, there are attachments that they can attach, notes, photographs, whatever there. And if it's a consultant, for example, why is this payment so high? You want to know. So you would be able to either look at previous invoices that you have paid last year or the year before, or you look at similar consultants. You just search either by the expense type, and you can look at similar invoices. So for me, it's more for decision makers, people that finally click the button and authorize that payment. You need that level of comfort before you hit that button. My payment authorization limit, Dante, is $1 million. That's very heavy responsibility on my shoulder. I need to know that this money that I'm approving today is legit.
Yeah, that's awesome. Yeah, so talking about the confidence and making sure that you are comfortable signing off, that's very important for your role, but also for Jasbe as a whole. But most organisations will agree with that as well. Really appreciate the input on that, guys. Just move on to the next part of our webinar. We've got our final poll question. Everyone's please saying hooray. They're not going to ask any more questions. How ready is your organisation to modernise its approval workflows in the next 12 months? So we won't share this. This is more for us to information gather. So yeah, obviously have a look at those responses and vote for the best result. And I'll give you guys 5 seconds. There we go. Cool. Awesome. All right. So we've covered a really lot in this session, and I appreciate everyone that's stuck by us in this whole hour session. It's a really good, topic to be exploring, something that's quite, relevant in today's day and age. So I'm just trying to look at how we're doing for time, guys. Yep. All right. So we're doing quite good for time. So we'd like to go through some of the Q&As that have been presented in the chat. So there's a question here: can a ProSpend's approval workflow integrate with our existing accounting software? So I'll answer that one. So definitely can integrate with your existing accounting software. Like I mentioned throughout the webinar, we integrate with 50 different systems. If you go onto our website into integrations page, you'll see the different systems we integrate with. You know, MYOB products, Sage Intact, Sage 300. You know, obviously NetSuite, Xero, and then some older systems as well. Reckon for the smaller systems, and also Microsoft Business Central and F&O, as well as a few others as well. I've got another question, and I thank you so much, Diane, for putting this question forward. Diane Siemens, how do you get the budget into ProSpend? Are they read from the accounting system? This is a really good question. I really appreciate this question. ProSpend's budget module is a separate budget module to the accounting system. So it is a standalone budget module. This allows you to then be able to then put in multiple budgets, and you can have different budgets as opposed to your accounting system. So there's more flexibility around that. So you can have budgets loaded in to the system. There is an import function, so you could export it from your accounting system and import it into ProSpend. But you have budgets by different dimensions. So it could be based on departments, could be based on projects, project tasks, or even by GL code. And it could even be broken down to a mini project by GL code. So quite flexible and can be covered off with multiple budgets over multiple periods or multiple date ranges. So something, you know, which is a no-cost option at ProSpend for new customers as well. We've got Alice asking a question. I really appreciate the question, Alice, as well. Can expenses related to marketing but tied to a specific project be approved at 2 levels? First, by the marketing manager as a required account-related approval, and then secondly by the project manager since the payment comes from the specific project budget. We can do that. We definitely can. So we can have approvals that are set up based on that requirement, and it can be at that level. So going off to the marketing manager, you know, no problem. We can have that assigned in that approval process, and then goes off to the project management manager as well. So that's definitely possible in ProSpend. Just there's more questions coming through, so just bear in mind we are limited with time. Did you encounter challenges from your manager when reviewing or approving a lot of invoices, and as a result not being able to focus on other tasks? So if you can respond to that, Stephen, I'll repeat the question again. Sorry, I went over it. Did you encounter challenges? So just to you, Stephen, did you encounter challenges from your manager when reviewing or approving a lot of invoices, and as a result, not being able to focus on other tasks?
That's the reason why you need a system, because the system will structure what sort of invoices that can be processed. Like I said, you've already decided these are the suppliers that they can approve. These are the limits that they can approve. So you may think that the approval is just a matter of formality, you know, just going through the clicking the buttons, but that approval process is actually a accountability thing for the managers. So that's why having trust in the system is very important. Yeah, you see. So the only thing that you can do is to come back and then audit the payments that you have done. Like I said, yeah.
Sorry to cut you off, Stephen. We've just got a couple more questions. I'll add some more. I just want to get through some of these questions. We won't get through all of them. So I'll just add a few more questions with some answers around that. So one of the questions is approval alerts. Is this a standard feature or is this an extra option to be set up? So it is a standard feature in our expense and AP invoice modules. So that's a no-cost option. It's totally embedded in that product as well. And there's also here a question around when you enter in the bank account details into ProSpend, does it check the invoice when scanning what the bank details are on the invoice? So yeah, I've talked about it a few times. It does all that. So it looks at the invoice. We scan that with OCR machine learning to then read the banking information, and then based on the master record from the accounting system, we'll then cross-reference to make sure there's a match and flag that if it isn't a match. And so the admin person in ProSpend will be notified on that as well. And just on the last question, and I really appreciate all the questions coming through, feel free to reach out to us if you've got lots of questions, and I will share at the end of this our details and the website to reach out to us if you want to do a discovery call or ask just questions. I'm happy to have a chat, and our team is as well. So there's a question here: how can we prevent users being added as admin by accident? So if a user's, you can't actually accidentally just add an admin as a user, right? So there's different roles. So you need to be an admin to be able to create an admin. But there is a audit log around that. So it can't be just an end user or a manager that adds in a person to be an admin. So there's different roles in the system and different user permissions around what access they have. ProSpend can handle multi-entity with the one instance of our platform. So then you can have all your different trading entities and restrict the users on what they can see across the various entities, and even restrict the expense listing and information across the entities that it wants to see. So that's really good information. Good questions, good engagement. I really appreciate the questions. There was a few more. I appreciate everyone putting through those questions in the chat. So I appreciate everyone joining this webinar today. We are at the end of the hour, it's been a great session, and hopefully everyone has had a great time on this webinar as best they can. A big thank you to both our expert speakers, Joyce and Stephen. It's been a great pleasure having you both on this webinar and talking about the approval automation journey with us. As I mentioned before, following on the conclusion of this webinar, we'll send out that handy approvals improvement checklist. And also in a few days, we'll also send another email with the full recording of this webinar, just to watch back or share with your team, for anyone else that missed it, or there's certain areas you want to review. We also have coming up, and you can see on the screen, we've got a QR code. It has a link to be able to register to our purchase order webinar. So we're having another webinar on the 22nd of October. Please scan the webinar code, the QR code that's on screen, on the right of the screen, and register. We'd like to have you on board that. That will really tie in well with what Joyce has weighed in today around purchase orders and how they use that for Beef Australia, but also just to understand how you can control costs with ProSpend. Finally, any questions you might have around optimizing approval workflows, just reach out to us. My details are there as well on screen. No, they're not, but we'll have that in the email once we send that out in a few days. If you'd like to have a personalized demo, you can send that through that email as well, or go to our website, and also feel free to download that approvals improvement checklist that's on screen as well. So thank you everyone for joining today and being part, and hopefully that was a lot of good insights for you guys. And I hope everyone has a great day, but thanks all, and bye for now.